At 0612 hours local time, the atmosphere inside the ready room at Belbek Air Base was defined by the lethargic rhythm of a routine morning shift, with pilots drinking lukewarm coffee and scanning flight logs, completely unaware that a dozen FP-2 drones were currently screaming over the Black Sea at 80 meters altitude, headed straight for their location. In less time than it takes to have a pizza delivered, a seemingly standard morning in Crimea would dissolve into one of the most embarrassing combat aviation losses of the entire war. The pilots were chatting with ground crews about maintenance schedules, while 40 kilometers to the west, 12 shaped charges were closing the distance at 95 kilometers per hour. This wasn't just an attack. It was a physics lesson delivered at terminal velocity. The base, bristling with the world's most expensive air defense systems, was about to learn that spending billions of dollars on radars doesn't matter if your software architecture contains a fatal logic error that classifies a lethal threat as a harmless migratory bird. The 12 drones flew in 3 loose formations of 4, spreading across 2 kilometers of open water to maximize their survival chances against random visual detection. At 80 meters altitude, they were flying aggressively below the radar horizon for most Russian search systems, effectively invisible until they hit the 30-kilometer mark where the curvature of the Earth could no longer hide them. The lead group crossed this invisible geometric line at 0613. Somewhere ahead on the Crimean coast, massive Russian radar antennas were already rotating, searching, and painting empty sky where the drones would appear in mere seconds. The operators in Ukraine, sitting in a bunker hundreds of kilometers away, couldn't actually see the target yet. Their video feeds wouldn't activate until the terminal approach phase to save bandwidth and maintain radio silence. For now, they just watched telemetry data. Altitude 80 meters, airspeed 95 kilometers per hour, heading 090. A stream of digital confidence flowing into a chaotic analog world. Then, the first radar found them. The Nebo-SVU early warning radar sat on a strategic rise northwest of the main runway, its massive antenna rotating once every 6 seconds, like a persistent mechanical eye searching for intruders. Most modern radars struggle to see small plastic drones because their radar-absorbing coatings and composite airframes scatter the signal into background noise, effectively erasing the aircraft from the screen. But the Nebo-SVU operated on VHF wavelengths, frequencies so long that they bounce off anything larger than a meter across, due to the phenomenon of resonance. Stealth shaping means absolutely nothing when you are hit by a radio wave bigger than the aircraft itself. The FP-2's 6-meter wingspan lit up on the operator's screen like a bonfire in a dark room. At 0614, the radar operator watched 12 distinct contacts materialize out of the electronic noise. Range 38 kilometers, bearing 315, closing fast. He immediately keyed the alert to the S-400 battery. The response from the S-400 battery came back in seconds. Negative. The system would not engage. The problem wasn't a lack of missiles or a lack of willingness. It was a hard-coded physics problem buried deep in the system's logic. The S-400's targeting software was designed in 2007 to filter out birds and weather clutter by automatically ignoring anything moving slower than 100 kilometers per hour. These drones were cruising at 95. On the S-400 screens, the contacts flickered like ghosts, appearing for one sweep and vanishing the next, never holding a solid track long enough for a firing solution. This was the result of a velocity filter, essentially a spam filter for radar. It works great until your most important message comes from a sender you didn't whitelist. The drones weren't spam. They were the main threat, and the world's most advanced air defense system was automatically deleting them from reality because they were flying 5 kilometers per hour too slow. The only system capable of engaging these slow-moving targets was the Pantsir S-2, and it was currently sitting 3 kilometers away, covering the fuel depot on the other side of the base. At maximum road speed across the tarmac, it would take 4 minutes to reach the radar site. The drones would arrive in 6. It was going to be tight, but doable. The driver slammed the vehicle into gear and roared onto the access road, only to hit something that isn't in any military manual. A fuel truck parked in the middle of the road with its driver asleep. The Pantsir driver hit the horn. Nothing. He got on the radio, screaming for the vehicle to move. Still nothing. The fuel truck driver's radio was likely turned off or drowned out by his own snoring. 30 seconds burned. 45. The Pantsir had to brutally lurch around the truck, bouncing through a muddy drainage ditch, its 30-ton suspension groaning under the stress. A whole minute was lost to simple human incompetence. While the Russians played traffic jam, the FP-2s crossed the coastline at 0617. Russian GPS jammers were now screaming. saturating the electromagnetic spectrum with enough noise to scramble a cruise missile's navigation. But the drones weren't relying on satellites. Each unit carried a navigation computer running 3 systems simultaneously: GPS when available, an inertial unit tracking acceleration, and a downward-facing camera comparing the ground below against stored satellite imagery. This is called terrain matching. The drone's camera takes a snapshot of the ground, breaks it into a grid of light and dark pixels, and compares it to a map stored on its hard drive. If the drone has drifted 50 meters east, the computer sees the mismatch and corrects the flight path 10 times per second. The Russians could jam every frequency from here to Moscow, and it wouldn't matter. You simply cannot jam a camera looking at the ground unless you physically cover the entire country in a tarp. At 0619, the lead drone pulled up to 400 meters for its terminal dive. The Nebo radar painted it instantly, tracking the dive angle and calculating the impact point with mathematical perfection. It could see the threat, but seeing isn't stopping. The radar could do absolutely nothing to prevent what happened next. The shaped charge warhead introduced itself to the antenna array 7 seconds later. $35 million of VHF radar technology was instantly scattered across the hillside in a shower of burning composite and steel. The system designed to detect stealth fighters at 100 kilometers had been destroyed by a plastic drone it saw coming for 6 full minutes. The second Nebo radar, sitting 800 meters east, suffered an identical fate 90 seconds later. Belbek Air Base had just gone blind. No early warning, no long-range detection. The door was now wide open. But the S-400 still had its fire control radar, the 92 and 6. This was the critical component that actually guided missiles to their targets. Without the Nebo radars to warn it, the 92 and 6 was now scanning frantically, looking for threats it should have known about minutes ago. Someone in command had decided this radar was too valuable to lose, so they had built a metal cage around it. The only problem was that this protection was better suited for keeping chickens in than keeping missiles out. 3 FP-2s were approaching from the northeast, their terminal cameras locked onto the glowing heat signature of the radar's electronics. The lead drone began its dive at 0622, coming down at a 47-degree angle, well outside the geometry of the cage. The steel bars that would have stopped a horizontal attack did nothing against a weapon falling from the sky. The warhead punched through the top of the radar vehicle, and secondary explosions rippled through the compartment as the electronics cooked off. By the time the Pantsir air defense system finally screeched to a halt at the burning radar site, the crew had less than 2 minutes to prevent total catastrophe. Skipping the standard stabilization protocols, they forced the search radar to spin up immediately, desperate to find the remaining threats in the darkness. The operator's screen lit up instantly with 3 hostile contacts approaching from just over 4 kilometers away, flying low and descending fast. On paper, this should have been an easy win for the Russian crew. Their vehicle was armed with a full magazine of interceptor missiles, each capable of accelerating to hypersonic speeds in the blink of an eye and pulling maneuvers that would tear a standard aircraft apart. Tracking radar was sensitive enough to lock onto a target the size of a grapefruit at 10 kilometers, so hitting 3 slow-moving drones flying in a straight line should have been like a grandmaster playing chess against a pigeon. But the Ukrainian operators had anticipated this exact mismatch and prepared a geometric trap. As the Pantsir launched its first interceptor, 2 of the incoming drones suddenly crossed flight paths. To the radar, which sees the world in reflections rather than images, the 2 distinct signatures merged into a single, confused blob of energy. The missile's guidance computer, forced to choose between splitting targets, essentially guessed wrong. It chased a phantom echo while the real threat continued its dive uninterrupted. The second drone was intercepted successfully, disintegrating into a cloud of shrapnel about 2 kilometers out. But the third unit was now inside the critical minimum engagement zone. Every guided missile needs a certain amount of distance to arm its warhead and stabilize its flight path. Fire too close, and the weapon is just a harmless metal tube. The Pantsir's interceptors required just over a kilometer of flight time to become lethal, but the final drone was already inside that boundary. The operator desperately switched to the twin 30mm cannons, weapons designed to unleash a wall of lead at 5,000 rounds per minute. However, physics once again refused to cooperate. The drone was diving at a steep angle of more than 50 degrees, while the cannons could only elevate to 45. Tracers arced harmlessly into the empty night sky, failing to intercept the threat. A split second later, the shaped charge slammed into the vehicle's engine block. Belbek had just lost its last line of defense. The early warning eyes were gone, the fire control brain was fried, and the point defense shotgun was burning. Yet 4 drones were still airborne, banking hard toward the parked aircraft. Sitting on the flight apron in the middle of this chaos was a MiG-31 interceptor, a massive aircraft worth tens of millions of dollars. In a display of decision-making that borders on negligence, the ground crew had chosen this specific moment, while explosions were literally rocking the base less than a kilometer away, to perform maintenance. The aircraft sat fully exposed with its canopies raised, effectively inviting the enemy inside. The drone approached from just under 400 meters, its camera clearly picking out the twin-tail silhouette and the dark rectangles of the open cockpit. The operator didn't hesitate, lining up the crosshairs where the wing root met the fuselage. When the warhead detonated, it demonstrated the terrifying efficiency of the Monroe effect. The explosive collapsed a copper liner into a focused jet of superplastic metal, moving at speeds that make bullets look stationary. This jet punched effortlessly through the titanium skin and ruptured the fuel cells before detonating the heavy air-to-air missiles waiting in the weapons bay. The resulting secondary blast scattered the heavy interceptor across the tarmac like a discarded toy, turning a strategic asset into a smoldering pile of scrap metal. While the MiG was burning, a panic-induced command came down from the regiment's headquarters. Scramble the fighters. 2 Su-27 flankers began rolling out of their hardened shelters, their pilots hoping to get airborne and hunt down the attackers. But launching a fourth-generation fighter jet isn't like starting a getaway car. It is a complex, time-consuming ritual that cannot be rushed without risking the aircraft. The massive turbofan engines require nearly 2 minutes just to spool up from a cold start to idle thrust. If you rush the fuel injection, you risk a compressor stall that can destroy the engine before you even release the brakes. Furthermore, the navigation computers need time to align their inertial platforms, sensing the rotation of the Earth to determine which way is up. Skip this, and you are flying blind. The pilots were trying to compress a 5-minute startup sequence into 3, frantically flipping switches, while the remaining drones circled overhead like vultures waiting for a meal. The maintenance crews were still pulling wheel chocks and checking control surfaces when the drones entered their terminal dives. The pilots, strapped into their cockpits, were completely unaware that they were sitting in stationary targets while their navigation gyros slowly spun up. The first drone struck the lead flanker at the wing root, detonating the fuel stored there and igniting the air-to-air missiles hanging on the pylons. The explosion was absolute, instantly transforming the sleek fighter into a fireball that illuminated the entire flight line. 2 seconds later, the second drone slammed into the trailing aircraft, punching through the canopy and detonating inside the avionics bay. It didn't explode as violently as the first. Instead, it simply burned, with fire spreading rapidly through the fuselage as hydraulic lines ruptured. In less than 5 seconds, 2 of Russia's premier air superiority fighters, with a combined value approaching $70 million, were written off. The final drone, having no aircraft left to target, adjusted its course and slammed into the control tower, shredding the communications array and ensuring that even if an aircraft survived, it wouldn't be talking to anyone. The return on investment for Ukraine was astronomical, trading cheap plastic drones for a substantial portion of an air regiment. The strategic hangover from this morning raid will linger far beyond the smoke clearing from the runway, because replacing a Nebo-SVU radar isn't like buying a new toaster at the local appliance store. These systems rely on hand-built artisanal electronics that require specific high-frequency semiconductors, components that Russia can no longer easily import due to strangled supply chains. Before the war, the lead time for a sophisticated VHF-active electronically scanned array was roughly 18 months. Now, with sanctions biting down on every microchip shipment, that timeline has likely stretched to 3 years or more. This creates a terrifying reality for Russian commanders. For the next 1,000 days, the northwestern approach to Crimea effectively has a blind spot the size of Switzerland. To compensate, the surviving S-400 batteries must keep their high-power engagement radars active 24/7, which is essentially a death sentence for the hardware. Fire control radars are like top-fuel drag racing engines. They are engineered for short, intense bursts of extreme power, not for running marathons. Forcing a 92N6 radar to transmit continuously will burn out its traveling wave tubes and liquid cooling pumps in a matter of weeks, inevitably turning the pride of Russia's air defense network into expensive static displays through sheer mechanical exhaustion. However, the most terrifying lesson for military planners analyzing this footage isn't just about gaps in radar coverage. It is about the absolute obsolescence of electronic warfare as a primary shield. For decades, Russian military doctrine rested on the arrogant assumption that they could simply blast enough noise into the radio spectrum to confuse any incoming smart weapon. effectively blinding it before impact. That assumption just evaporated in a cloud of burning aviation fuel. The FP2's integration of optical terrain matching and terminal image recognition demonstrates that the electromagnetic spectrum is no longer the undisputed king of guidance. When a munition navigates by cross-referencing real-time camera feeds with satellite maps, traditional jamming is rendered functionally useless because the kill chain doesn't rely on external signals. You can spoof a GPS satellite, but you cannot jam the visible light spectrum without blinding your own pilots. Unless the Russians can figure out a way to physically cloak an entire airfield or fundamentally alter the topography of the Crimean Peninsula every 12 hours to confuse the image classifiers, they are defenseless. They are facing a tactical environment where their $20 million electronic warfare complexes are about as useful as a paper umbrella in a hurricane against a $2,000 camera with a cheap processor attached to it. By forcing the Russians to commute to the war, Ukraine effectively reduces the sortie rate of the Black Sea Fleet by 40% without shooting down a single additional plane. It is a soft kill achieved through pure geography and fear. Finally, the economics of this engagement are enough to make a Kremlin accountant weep. The total cost of the Ukrainian strike package, 12 FP2 drones, launch catapults, and support equipment, comes in at roughly $300,000. Which is about the price of a single luxury car in Moscow. In exchange, they deleted 2 early warning radars, a fire control system, a Pantsir missile truck, a MiG-31 interceptor, and 2 Su-27 flankers. The conservative replacement cost for that hardware exceeds $150 million. That is a return on investment of roughly 50,000% delivered in under 10 minutes. In the brutal mathematics of attrition warfare, this isn't just a victory. It is a liquidation sale where Ukraine bought the operational capability of an entire air regiment for pennies on the dollar.